Hi, everyone. Hang on just 1 second. Hi, everyone. I just want to take a quick moment so we can jump right to it and say thank you so much for being here. My name is Devan Trigiani. I am the South Carolina State PTA president. We are very excited about the new social and emotional learning kickoff that we have partnered with District 13 and Tandem Health. And this kickoff is really important to us. Many of you that know about PTA know that Reflections is one of our crucial flagship programs, but this is the next area that the South Carolina PTA is moving in. Now, before I can go much further into that, I'm not going to take the limelight away from my very special friend. I want to introduce you to Jessica McKinley, who is the District 13 president and the State PTA Volunteer of the Year. She has worked tirelessly in District 13 and made so many changes and brought so many things to light that she is a shining light in PTA. She just gives her heart and soul to everything she does. She's passionate. She gets excited. She loves kids. I reflect back. I don't want to take anything away because we couldn't have the award programs this year, but I have to tell you, she was nominated by several people for that award, but most importantly, her husband's words really rang true, and she didn't even know that he nominated her. So I'm not going to give that away because if we finally get out of this COVID and can celebrate, I want her to hear those words in a very, very special format. But she is a gifted, very talented young lady, and we're very excited to have her serve on our state board. So without further ado, my very special friend and guest, Jessica McKinley, District 13 PTA President. Go ahead, Jessica.
Wow. Hi, good evening. I hope we're all doing well and staying safe. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Jessica McKinley, and I am the South Carolina PTA District 13 President. And I hope you find this presentation helpful in your everyday lives. This seminar is brought to you by a grant we received from National PTA in the amount of $15,000. TikTok donated $1.5 million to National PTA, and in turn, they wanted to give back to the more local PTAs for COVID-19 relief. Our area is mental health, social emotional support for our community, and we know that many people have been very stressed or anxious due to the current situation. Today's seminar will tackle stress management, and I would like to introduce you to our guest speaker. We could not have done this without Tandem Health's Chief of Behavioral Health, Dr. David Justice, board certified psychiatrist and fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. Just real quick, before I turn this over to Dr. Justice, I would like to remind you that you will be muted throughout the presentation just to limit distractions. However, we do encourage you all to ask questions at any time by simply typing them in the chat box. If you have a more personal question or private question, we will have about a half an hour at the end of the presentation for you to do so. Thank you so much.
So thanks, everybody. It's nice to meet with y'all in a virtual format. As mentioned, I'm Dr. Justice, and we're here to talk about stress and also how to manage it. I've done this talk a couple of times in different formats, but this is my first time doing a virtual format. So I hope that this will go well. Just wanted to reiterate what Jessica was saying, to please stay muted throughout the seminar so that there are no distractions. But I wanted to outline that you can ask questions at any time using the chat box. And there will be time at the end of the talk as well. So hopefully we can field if you have questions about the presentation or maybe even some general questions for me. We can certainly entertain any of those. So this is our outline, and I know that the presentation is going to be recorded, but also when you got the link to the GoToMeeting, you should have also gotten a handout as well, and that's yours to have and to print out and use. And it has a lot of the information that we'll cover tonight, as well as some additional information and a couple of additional practices on there, so I hope that you find that useful. We're going to talk about stress and the body and the mind, and then we're going to transition into talking about different types of stress. We'll spend some time talking about how we cope with stress or maybe don't cope with stress at times. I'll spend just a brief moment talking about treatment options. So this is if your symptoms would rise to the extent that you would need to see somebody like myself or a counselor, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll spend some time talking about things that you can do on your own, things that may cost nothing or very low cost options that you can use at home to try and help with your stress and managing things, and try and give you some real useful and actionable information about that. So we're going to start with stress and the body and the mind, and it's no surprise that stress affects both of those areas. Stress is, we often talk about stress as our fight or flight response, and it can have a lot of effects on both our bodies and our minds. And it's important to understand as we go forward, and I'll touch on this a couple of times, is that different people can respond differently to the same kind of stress. So for one person, they may seemingly breeze through it with very few or any symptoms that they show. And for someone else, it can be very troubling and may persist for a long period of time. It's also important to remember, and again, I'll emphasize this a couple of times, that stress is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a natural mechanism to get us out of dangerous situations. So a dangerous situation might be like this. So if you're looking at your screen and you saw the image of the lion, you may have jumped back, or you may have gasped, or your heart may have ticked up a couple of beats, and that's normal and that's expected, and that's what we want to have happen. So in a stressful situation, our stress response functions as a survival mechanism, okay? It gets our body ready to either run away from the lion, if that seems to be the best course of action, or if running away just doesn't present itself, then it gets us ready to fight back. It enables us to make rapid changes and respond rapidly to dangerous circumstances. And it also causes us to focus our attention down on the threat and how to deal with it, either by fight or by flight. So if you're faced with the lion attack, as you saw in the slide earlier, and running away seems to be the best option, you definitely want to focus on your path and running as fast as you can. You don't want to be distracted by the color of the pretty flowers on the ground or the shape of the clouds in the sky. You want to focus in on what's immediately important. And that's expected, and that's really what we want to have happen. So as I mentioned, the stress response is the body's attempt to avoid threats. And it's a short-term mechanism. So it's designed to be activated, and then once the threat is over, which hopefully happens relatively quickly in the wild, then it's designed to go away. If you have pets in the home, you'll see that this is the way that they react. Dogs and cats will respond very aggressively when they feel threatened or when they feel frightened. And then you'll notice that relatively quickly, they can go back to being happy-go-lucky and seem to recover really quickly. So stress is great if it's activated appropriately and briefly and then goes away, but it can be disastrous if it lasts for an extended period of time. So I apologize because this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I wanted you to have the information. On the left-hand side, you can see all the wonderful things that stress does and that we want stress to do when we're faced with a crisis or a dangerous situation, okay? Anything from mobilizing energy and increasing our heart rate and raising our blood pressure, to funneling energy to our muscles to enable us to either run away from the stress or to fight off the stress. The other key thing that you want to have happen in a stressful situation is you want to shut down anything that usually uses energy in the body, but isn't really needed at that period of time. That could be things like digestion, growth projects like growing or reproduction, or even our immune response, okay? Now on the right-hand side, you can see all the problems that would happen if your stress response is triggered on an ongoing basis, okay? That mobilization of energy tends to wear us out and causes muscle pain, chronic fatigue, problems with our blood sugar and diabetes, causes problems with our stress and hypertension. It can cause ongoing suppression of growth, which can cause dwarfism if you're a child and you're in a stressful situation. It can actually cause our brains to shrink and can, in some circumstances, cause our nerve cells to die. Now, the brain is my area of expertise, and in the brain, again, these are kind of all the wonderful things that we want stress to do when we're faced with a stressful situation. So it ramps up the blood sugar and it ramps up the delivery of that blood sugar and also oxygen to the brain. It also enhances our ability to remember traumatic details about the situation. So if we encountered a lion in the wild, we really want to remember where that happened and what was going on then so that we can avoid that in the future. It also causes a brief increase in a brain neurochemical called dopamine, which is the pleasure chemical that allows us to feel better and to dull our pain responses so that we're able to fight more efficiently or to run faster if that's what we need to do. But again, over the long haul, if our stress response is activated over an ongoing basis, then it can cause our brains to not be able to use oxygen correctly. It can cause our dopamine or our pleasure chemical to not work as effectively. So people who are in chronic stressful situations tell me often that they feel numb. They don't feel a lot of anything. The only emotion that tends to get better and work better under chronic stress is fear. And that's run through a certain area deep in our brain called the amygdala. And under chronic stressful situations, the amygdala actually gets larger and it also works a lot better. So it tends to be much better at pumping out those stressful chemicals, which tend to cause our fear responses. Now let's move on to the different types of stress. And this is my own kind of way of thinking about stress. I like to kind of categorize stress in this way. So I tend to categorize it in these 4 buckets. So we have general stress, cumulative stress, acute stress, which is usually traumatic in some way or other, and then post-traumatic stress. Okay, and we're going to spend some time on a couple of these. Now, before I go on, there is a question I see. Jessica, is there a question? Do you want to let me know what's going on?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, will these slides be available to everybody that's in attendance?
I can certainly send the slide deck to you if you can. If you have the email list, you can certainly blast it out.
Okay.
If you want me to do that, I certainly don't mind doing that.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the handout, as I mentioned, has some of the information that's in the presentation, but not all. So there are some differences between the two. And especially with the presentation, I was tweaking it up until early this afternoon with some new information that I'm going to talk about a little later in the presentation. So yes, that's an excellent question. Yes, I can definitely make the slides available for everyone. So let's go on and start with general stress. Now, it's no surprise to anyone that stress is just a normal factor of our daily lives. We all have stress, we encounter stress in our lives, and it's important to emphasize that stress is not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, stress is what gets us up on time and gets our kids to school on time and allows us to pay our bills and get our work done and so forth. Also, stress is what motivates us to change and to grow. If you do any kind of exercise like bodybuilding or weightlifting, it's only when you put the muscles under the stress of lifting increasing amounts of weight that the muscles will grow and develop. So stress is not necessarily a bad thing. Kind of like with the earlier discussion that I mentioned with the lion attack, even with general stress, it's not really a problem until it tends to be unremitting, until it doesn't go away when we would expect it to. So that's where I class it as cumulative stress. Okay, so it's still general stress, but it's kind of an unhealthy buildup of that day-to-day stress that we go through every single day of our lives. Part of the problem is that it may result from stress that's not resolved. Okay, if you can't resolve a situation like the coronavirus situation that we find ourselves in these days, or sometimes it can result from a situation that was resolved, but you don't recognize, your brain and your body don't recognize that the situation was resolved. So to go back to our example of a lion attack, if you happen to be attacked by a lion when you went on vacation to Africa, but now you're back here in South Carolina, but every time you walk out your door, you're still looking for a lion, then your brain and your body really haven't recognized that that situation doesn't really obtain anymore, okay? It's important to understand that this may cause long-term problems for an individual. Some examples of chronic stress are environmental stressors, and obviously the global pandemic fits into that, along with extreme weather. So the West Coast of the United States has experienced an example of that with those awful firestorms that they're having out there. Physical stressors such as famine, chronic pain, etc. Psychological or social stressors such as debt or financial struggles, family conflict, and social isolation. And it's important, again, to realize that in the coronavirus world that we're living in right now, it's hitting all three of these areas. So we not only have to deal with the global pandemic and all of the worry about, do I have coronavirus and am I going to be exposed to coronavirus? But also it can cause real worries about how am I going to feed my family? And there's a lot of families that are going to food banks or other institutions to help out with stretching their family meals. We also see some people who are struggling with persistent problems directly related to coronavirus infections that just don't go away. And then they're kind of chronically either in pain or dealing with chronic infections. Also, due to the economic downturn, the coronavirus has led to financial stress, debt problems, as well as just the isolation of all of us being in our homes instead of socializing and taking vacations and going out as we would normally do. Now, this slide I left in there. This is a slide from my previous talks when I've done this kind of talk, but still it's important to realize that modern society does play a role in our increased stress level. Such things as just the 24-hour lifestyle. You know, we've kind of gotten away from going to sleep when the sun goes down. Economic pressures. Another pressure that I want to spend a couple of minutes on is the difference between things that are urgent and things that are important. So the best example of that is this kind of device right here. These little devices, these smartphones that we have, we all have a smartphone or a tablet or something like that, or our children do. They're wonderful devices and they've revolutionized our lives, but they're also designed to be urgent, right? You've got one of the things, you're carrying it around in your purse or in your pocket all day, and it rings, it buzzes, it chirps, it tweets, it is constantly trying to grab your attention. If you take a moment and you're in a conversation with someone and then your phone goes off and you look at the screen, try to be aware of how many times do you do that, and the information that you see is really not that important. The important thing was the conversation that you were having with the person that was right in front of you. So take a moment when you are in the situation like that to maybe not look at your phone so much. You can turn off notifications if you want. If you don't know how to do that, if you've got a child or a teenager in your house, they sure know how to do that. So get them to show you how to do that. Also, if you really have a problem with turning your phone off or setting your phone down, try maybe for a day or even a weekend, turning your phone from color to grayscale. You'd be amazed how unattractive this device becomes when it's in black and white instead of in all these bright, shiny colors. Another element on the slide that I wanted to pay attention to was just the speed of change. If you're lucky enough to still have grandparents, you can ask them about what the world was like back in their day. And what they'll tell you is that things change very slowly. They were used to innovations that came at a kind of a gradual, slow pace, whereas nowadays we're used to things being obsolete in a year. You know, you buy a phone and a year later there's a new model, and the one you've got is now almost out of date. So the speed at which our lives have changed is increasingly accelerating, and this can also add to our general stress level. I want to spend a couple of minutes on acute stress and PTSD. Acute stress, as I mentioned, is usually related to some kind of a trauma. These are events that have the potential to cause significant distress for anyone. And they're generally extreme events that are outside the realm of normal human experience. Even the coronavirus situation that we're all going through now, that only happened once 100 years ago. So it doesn't happen very often. So it's not a common occurrence. This slide is before the coronavirus, and before the coronavirus even happened, still exposure to some kind of trauma or stress was relatively common. About 80% of us here in the US would be exposed at some point in our lives to some kind of trauma. But only a small percentage would go on to develop persistent stress-related problems, such as post-traumatic stress disorder from those. It is important, however, to recognize the fourth bullet point down. I want to spend a moment on that. Is that it's important to recognize that the responses that you have to an acute traumatic event like the situation we're in now, the responses you're having are the normal reactions of a normal person to an abnormal event, okay? Another way to think about that is it's okay to not feel okay. So I'll emphasize this a couple of times as we go through the talk, that I want you to give yourself a break when you feel overwhelmed at times, when you feel stressed, because we're all feeling that way. And that's the normal reaction of a normal person to an abnormal event. Now, in the acute stress situation like we're going through, you may struggle with some or all of the physical symptoms that you see on the list here. I commonly see people who tell me that they're just so much more exhausted than they were before. They have this incredible sense of fatigue. They tell me that no matter how much I sleep, it seems like I just can't ever get well rested. Chronic headaches are a common complaint that I see, as well as a feeling of kind of disconnection from other people. And a lot of the other symptoms on here can show up as well. Some of the mental symptoms that go along with acute stress are things like poor concentration and attention span. So a lot of the people that I work with have taken to calling it COVID brain, that, you know, we're just so stressed out about the COVID situation that we all struggle with attending to things and concentrating and remembering things. And also, just acute stress by itself can play with and disrupt our proper sense of time. And that's especially true for those of us who are stuck at home so much, when we're kind of out of our normal routine of getting out and doing things. That can really take a toll on our sense of time. Other people may suffer with the emotional symptoms of acute stress. Anything from what I mentioned earlier, the feelings of being numb or shocked, to depression or irritability. Everything just seems to get on your nerves and make you very angry. It's also easy to feel really overwhelmed, like you just can't handle one more thing that happens. Now, our reactions, I mentioned earlier that different people can go under the same stress and they can respond differently. And these are some of the reasons why that might be the case. So our reactions to a traumatic incident may be affected by how quickly it happens, whether we were expecting it, whether we lost someone. So it's different to see the horrific death tolls that you see on the television news all the time versus if you've lost a loved one or someone close to you. So the closer it gets, the harder it is to deal with. Sometimes it matters whether we have coping skills or not. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll have a couple that you can take with you and start to practice and put into play in your life. And then also the meaning that one assigns to the stressful incident can sometimes make a difference. Another one is our age when we're experiencing the stressful incident. It turns out that the older we are, generally the better we are at handling stress. So especially young children, if you've got kids in the house, young children, they don't really know how to process stressful situations like this. They're looking to us to make the world okay and to make sense of all of this. So sometimes that can add to our stress because we feel like I've got to be okay for those around me, for my family. So how do we cope with stress? Well, it's important to take a moment to ask yourself some questions. Are you aware of when you're stressed? Do you even know when you're having a stressful response? Or do you have to wait for people to tell you? Do you get brought up short when someone in your circle may, or a family or a friend may say, hey, you really seem like you're stressed out. Are you okay? Are you aware of the effects that stress has on your body and your mind? When I was going through the list of physical and mental and emotional symptoms, did some of those really strike home for you? When I've done, I use this slide a lot in my presentations, and when I've done this talk in live audiences, I always ask the audience members to anyone raise their hand that does not self-medicate their stress. So far, I've never had anyone raise their hand because it's a trick question. We all self-medicate our stress. We all do something already to kind of try to deal with the stressful situations that we're going through. These are some examples of self-medication strategies. And sometimes if they're working for you, that's great, but sometimes they may not work as well for you. So some people use various things like stimulants or depressants. So they need to be either more alert so that they can kind of be aware of the threats that are out there, or they just want to kind of numb out. Some people may indulge in comfort activities like overeating or oversleeping. Vacations is one of those things that we can't do right now, so you can't use that as kind of an escape valve. And some people just throw themselves into work, and sometimes that can be difficult now when we're all either working remotely or working from home. So what about treatment options? Well, often people will ask me, when should I seek help? When should I seek professional help? When should someone come and see someone like me? And these are some things you might want to consider if you're on the edge of thinking about, do I need to see someone for my level of stress? So if you have a level of stress or anxiety that's troubling for you and that persists for an extended period of time and that interferes with your daily life, then that's something you might want to consider getting help with. If you're noticing significant difficulty with a lot of areas of your life, your sleep, your appetite, your physical activity, if you feel that persistent feeling of numbness, if you just feel like you can't really experience any pleasure at all, then that might be a signal that you're under too much stress. The big thing that I key in on, again, is function. So if you're still doing your life and it's a little bit of a struggle, but you can still kind of do everything that you would normally do, then you may not need to see someone like me or a counselor or something like that. But if you're really struggling or you're losing your step in being able to manage the things in your daily life, if your level of function is decreasing, then that's really where you want to think about, do I need to seek help for that? And then as with a lot of other situations, if you're having any problems with persistent feelings of hopelessness or helplessness, those are times when you might want to seek help. Now, if you do seek help, these are the kind of things that you might consider as options. So on the left-hand column are things that you might go and see a counselor and have the counselor maybe work with you on. Things like cognitive therapy or mindfulness or other things, or even support groups. Those can be very helpful, and they don't require you to take medication. They don't require a prescription. On the right-hand column are all the various medication options that if you came and saw someone like me, we might talk about and consider for some people. And some of these medications can be very effective. Not that everyone needs medication, obviously. So we would often have a conversation about whether you even need medication or not, what the appropriate medication is for you. But I just wanted you to have these options in your packet so that you kind of know what you want to ask for if you're going to go and see a professional. Now we're going to move on to things that you can do at home or things that you can do for yourself to try and manage your stress. First couple of slides are just some basic ways that you can handle your stress on your own. An important one is that first topic there, work on accepting what is. It can be very difficult to accept the situation that we find ourselves in, and this doesn't mean that you have to just accept a situation that's bad and never work to change it. But it's exceptionally frustrating and stress-inducing when we struggle against something that we're powerless to make any change in. So understanding that we can't control what the virus does, all we can control is whether we take proper precautions or not. Another thing that people often lose themselves in is multitasking, trying to stay busy. And that's a critical mistake. Multitasking is never a good idea. It causes changes in the brain. It causes our stress level to increase. And it just leads to this chronic feeling of unsatisfaction because you're never really completing anything. So it's important, if you can, to try and take things one step at a time, take things one task at a time, work on it until it's complete if you can and cross it off your list. Or even if you can't complete it, work until you've done a good enough job for the moment and then move on to the next thing and take the next thing one thing at a time. Item 4 is a big one, again, to emphasize. Go easy with criticism, and especially of yourself. It's okay to not feel okay. Right now, everyone feels not okay. Understand that the symptoms you're going through are the normal reactions of a normal person to an abnormal situation. Also, the last item on the list, just to touch on again, cut down on some self-medication if it's not helpful for you. So if what you're doing is working for you, that's great. Keep doing it. But if it's not productive, if it's interfering with your ability to cope and to respond to stress, if it's interfering with your relationships, then maybe it's time to try something different. Item 1 on this next slide, please stop watching the news so much. If you could take one thing away, it might be this. Just stop. Unless your job, as mine does, requires you to stay on top of the absolute latest information about the coronavirus, stop watching it all the time. It's doing nothing but increasing your stress level. Again, if you're fortunate enough to have grandparents, they'll tell you that they got their news from the newspaper, usually in the morning, and maybe an evening newscast or broadcast. So maybe go back to that schedule. Maybe have a bite of the news in the morning, and if you have to, a bite of news before bedtime, and let it alone other than that. Keep a journal, if you can, is a really good idea. I'm going to have an app that website actually that I'll show you in just a few minutes that may help you to keep a mood journal. So keeping a journal can be really important for you. The item in the next column at the top, eat for energy, not for comfort, is an important one. As I mentioned, one of our kind of coping mechanisms for a lot of us is comfort eating. And, that may lead to the COVID-19 weight gain that you may notice, but it's not generally helpful for us. So try to eat for energy, not for comfort. And also an element in that same column, drink plenty of water. It's important to get away from so many of the sodas and the processed drinks and just drink water. It's a great idea to stay hydrated in situations like this. Again, focus on things that you can change and let go of the things that you can't change, okay? And it's very important to focus on sleep. Getting a proper amount of sleep is key in this situation. And try and keep track of the amount of sleep that you're getting every night. So if you're getting a good 7 to 8 hours and you still feel exhausted, that's okay. Understand that may be your reaction to stress. But try and always get good quality sleep if you can. And we'll have a couple of tips about that in a later slide. Now, some specific action items that you can take starting today that may help with your response to stress. The first, as I've mentioned a couple of times, is to remember to be kind to yourself when you're experiencing the overwhelming anxiety that we're going through right now. And it helps in this situation to understand that our brains really like certainty. Our brains really don't like uncertain situations. And our brains particularly like it when we know, when we're in a stressful situation, how long is it going to last? What's it going to be like while I'm going through it? And what's going to happen at the end? And we really know none of those things right now about the coronavirus situation. So again, give yourself a break when you feel overwhelmed, because we don't really know how this is going to go, how long it's going to go on, or what it's going to be like when it's over. Try and avoid light exposure between 11 p.m. rather, and 4 a.m. This is a critical one for helping to regulate our body clock, and we'll have more information about that in a later slide. But it turns out that our eyes can be really sensitive to ambient light, and particularly in that window of time, so 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. So if you're someone that likes to have electronics on late at night, please do yourself a favor and turn them off. If you have to have light on, like a night light or a light to see to get up and move around or use the bathroom, try and have it below the level of your knees, like a night light that's on a low outlet would be ideal. Because anything that's really above about waist level can really trigger our body clock to start thinking that, hey, it's time to get up and be awake and alert. Again, as I said, the next item, remember to focus on what you can control. And it turns out that if you pay attention, you'll probably realize this, that when you're most stressed or unhappy is probably when you're trying to control a situation that you have no influence over. Those of you with children will know what I mean. Another thing that can really help is to develop a regular practice of working with your breath. And so the next couple of slides, we're going to have a little audience participation, although I can't see you. I'm going to ask you to participate with me in doing a couple of exercises, and these are in your handout as well. But this will help you to start to try and work with your breath and your breathing in a different way. And these can be incredibly helpful at helping to lower our stress level. You ready? So our first one is just a basic breathing practice. Now, you may roll your eyes and think, Dr. Justice, I breathe all day, every day. It's no big deal for me. But it turns out that a lot of us are really breathing incorrectly. If you watch babies when they naturally breathe, what you'll find is that when they inhale, their bellies generally expand. And then when they exhale, their bellies contract. That's the way babies naturally breathe. And the reason is because they're using the diaphragm, which is a huge dome muscle that's in the space between our rib cage and our abdomen. So our lungs are right above the diaphragm and our abdomen is below the diaphragm. And what happens when we breathe naturally is that the diaphragm contracts as we inhale. It contracts and it pushes the belly out as it pulls downward, and it pulls the base of the lungs down, and it draws the air into the base of the lungs. Then when the diaphragm relaxes, the belly naturally moves back in toward the spine, the base of the lungs get pushed up, and the air flows out. So let's practice this for just a couple of breaths, okay? What I'd like for you to do is stand up straight as you can. If you're standing, if you're sitting, try and sit up straight, maybe away from the back of the chair a little bit. Imagine that there's a piece of string that's tied to the top of your head, and it's also tied to the rafters of the ceiling above you. And it's just kind of drawing you up, your spine a little bit straighter, okay? The best way to do this, the most calming way to breathe in this way, is to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a breath in, and I'd like for you to place your hands on your belly. As you breathe in through your nose, try and feel your belly expand and your hands separate a little bit from each other. And then as you exhale through the mouth, try and feel your belly collapse back toward your spine. So let's try a couple of times of this. In through the nose, your belly expands, the lungs get filled from the base. Exhale through the mouth, the belly contracts, the lungs get pressed up and the air gets pressed out. You want to do this without straining, but try to practice this for a couple of minutes every day. And you'll find that this can be a very effective technique at helping to damp down your stress level. This kind of breathing practice and the next one that I'm going to talk about, though, are really a practice. So it's something that works most effectively if you can do this consistently for at least a few minutes every single day. Our next practice is similar. This is called box breathing. Now, this is a technique that's designed to kind of calm down the nervous system. This is a technique that's used commonly by Navy SEALs and Special Forces to try and increase their mindfulness and their situational awareness, as well as calming them down before they go into combat. And the breathing practice is kind of like the breathing practice we just did, okay? But the difference is that you're going to breathe in a particular way. What you're going to do is you're going to inhale for a count of, let's say, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe in. Hold the breath in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold the breath out. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's why they call it a box. So we could try this for a couple of breaths, okay? A couple of breath cycles. Inhale for a count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold the breath in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale through the mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold the breath out. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you can do this consistently, and the number of counts that you do for the box really doesn't matter. What matters is that it's an equal number of counts for each part of the cycle. So if you're counting for a count of 5 or 6, that's fine. Then it's in for 5, hold the breath in for 5, exhale for 5, hold the breath out for 5. Try to do this practice again for 3 to 5 minutes a day and see if you don't feel less stressed as time goes on. The next technique, this is our last practice technique that we're going to do today. But this last practice technique is not really a practice. It's more of an emergency technique that you can use kind of on the spot. I like things like this that you can use on the spot when you're feeling really stressed and anxious, when you're feeling like you're about to lose it. And this can really damp down your stress level. This particular technique works by means of the sighing reflex, okay? It turns out that there's a nerve in our diaphragm called the phrenic nerve, which connects to the stem of our brain. And when this nerve gets triggered, it tends to increase the amount of oxygen, decrease the amount of carbon dioxide in our blood, and tends to decrease our heart rate and tends to lower our stress level. So how you would do this breathing technique, and you can do this technique anywhere. So if you get stressed out when you're waiting in the line at Walmart, if you get stressed out when someone's been very angry at you, you can use this technique. No one has to know what you're doing. No one will look at you oddly. What you do is you take 2 small sips of breath in through the nose quickly. So it's a rapid intake of breath, 2 small sips in, and then 1 long exhale through the mouth. So I'll demonstrate like this. So try that with me once. 2 small sips in, 1 long exhale out. Try that a couple of times and see if you don't feel a little bit less stressed and anxious. So again, this is a technique that you can use on the spot when you're starting to feel really stressed and anxious. Next is I want to say a few words about our biological rhythms. It turns out that we all have a biological clock, and our biological clocks are keyed to, obviously, our planet here, but they're all a little bit off. So we all have a biological clock that's a little bit fast or slow. Maybe your clock is a 23-hour clock, or maybe it's a 25 or a 26-hour clock. So your body likes to, if it was in a totally dark environment with no external cues, you would probably sleep and wake on your natural cycle, whatever that is. But if you can key it to the rhythms of the day, then you will find that your stress level is lower, that you're much less likely to be anxious, you're much less likely to be depressed, and you'll probably function a lot better. Now, this can be difficult to do, and especially with young children. But it helps, and I recommend this to patients sometimes, if you can keep your schedule as rigid as possible. So one of the things that means is that the time that you wake up every morning is within a 30-minute window or so every single day, Monday through Sunday. If you're going to wake up at 7, you wake up between 6:30 and 7:30 every single day. Sleep time is, again, the same time every single day. So if that's 11 o'clock at night, then that means that you go to sleep between 10:30 and 11:30 every single day. Meal times also within that same kind of window, okay? So breakfast, lunch, dinner, if you eat all 3 meals, those need to be as rigidly timed as possible. And particularly avoid eating meals at odd times if you can. This tends to really help to regulate various biological rhythms of hormone peaks and troughs, the elevation of cortisol that happens in the morning, which is our main stress hormone that also wakes us up and gets us alert, that then drops in the evening. That is one of the signals that it's time to go to bed at night. Another good tip is, as I mentioned earlier, try and shoot for between 7 and 9 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. Recent research has shown that it turns out that the vast majority of people really need between 7 and 9 hours of sleep a night. So if you're somebody who's scraping by on 5, 6 hours a night and you feel fine, you probably would feel a lot better if you got a little more sleep. It turns out that outdoor light is a great way also to keep our biological rhythms in sync. And even on cloudy days, the amount of light that you can be exposed to outside is far superior, far brighter than anything that you could get indoors, even with a very bright indoor light. So what I recommend is to try for a couple of minutes of outdoor light exposure without sunglasses before 9 a.m. every morning and after 5 p.m. or in the extreme winter time, probably after about 4 to 4:30 p.m. every single day. It turns out that the spectrum of light is different early in the morning, where it's shifted to more blue and ultraviolet light. And then in the evening, there are more red hues. And what you see is that this tends to entrain our brain and our body on a 24-hour biological clock. My wife would be very upset if I failed to mention vitamin D. Vitamin D is critical in many of our body systems. It turns out that vitamin D is not really a vitamin at all. It's a hormone that our bodies really produce naturally in response to sun exposure on our skin. But it turns out that in our modern society, none of us are outside long enough to get enough sun exposure in many climates, and even in sunny South Carolina, it can be very difficult. It can be especially difficult for patients or people who are of African American or Hispanic descent, just because they have a little bit more pigment in their skin. So they would have to stay outside a lot longer and get a lot more direct sun exposure to make enough vitamin D. But vitamin D is critical for our immune system. It also helps in regulating our mood, regulating our sleep cycles, as well as bone health that we're probably already aware of. So a good rule of thumb is to try for at least a bare minimum of 15 minutes of outside sun exposure between the hours of 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. every single day. And along with that, to consider taking a vitamin D supplement. And a lot of people aren't aware, but your medical provider can order a vitamin D test. So they can take some blood and tell you how much vitamin D is in your system and whether it's low or high. And you generally want to shoot for a blood level, if you have this done, of between 40 and 60 for most people. I want to come back to the 24-hour news cycle for a few minutes, because it turns out that people that watch a lot of cable news, whichever spectrum, whichever end of the political spectrum you happen to be on, they're a lot more stressed and a lot less happy. Part of the reason for that is because, as I mentioned before, back in the old days when we just had little periods of news in the newspaper and the newscast, they pretty much just presented the news of the day, what happened that day. But now that news channels are on 24 hours, they have to keep your attention somehow. And so everything is a crisis. Everything is awful or breaking news that you have to watch right now. Again, I mentioned earlier in the presentation this idea of urgent versus important. Well, 24-hour cable news is generally very urgent, but it's rarely important. So consider, again, getting your news in smaller doses that you ration throughout the day. And also maybe consider, maybe this weekend, taking a break from social media, turning off Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and Twitter, and just see how you feel. Just take a break and see whether you feel better at the end of the weekend or not. Chances are you might feel a little bit better, a little less stressed. Another topic that's important to recognize is that what we put in our bodies can increase our stress levels. And it turns out that too much exposure to simple sugars, sugary beverages, sweets, can really increase our stress level, both because those tend to cause problems with obesity and problems with our metabolism, and also because they tend to cause spikes in certain stress hormones, especially a couple hours after you partake of them. So that's why one of the quick fixes that I had in a slide earlier was to switch to water. Just drink water. Now, exercise, as you may be aware, is a great way to manage stress. It turns out that there was a study that was published just last month that I just read this morning, and that's why I had to update this slide, that it turns out that there's a specific chemical in the brain that increases our psychological resilience and decreases our risk of depression. So it makes us both more resilient to any stress in the environment and also decreases the risk that we might suffer from depression. And that chemical is stimulated by exercise. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to start going out and running a marathon or becoming a heavy bodybuilder. Just walking is a great form of exercise. And in fact, if you want to go for a walk outside, then you can multitask. You can get your exercise, you can get your sun exposure. If you do it in the proper way, where you're actually looking a little bit at the horizon instead of looking down at your phone all the time while you're walking around the block, then you can also decrease your stress level, because it turns out that that will decrease our stress level also. Just looking up, looking at the horizon. That can be another tip that you can use if you're stuck looking at a computer, as I am and a lot of us are, for a lot of your workday, is to build in breaks where you get up from your workstation and go outside. Look at the horizon for a few seconds. It can really make a big difference in your stress level. I want to finish up with a couple of websites and apps, and then we'll get to any questions. These are 4 of them that I put on here, and I think I included them in the handout as well. But these are ones that I recommend that I found to be very, very useful. The first is from the University of California at Los Angeles, their Mindfulness Awareness Research Center. This is a website, and they also now have an app for both Apple and Android phones. And they have some really good basic guided meditations that are relatively brief, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, that kind of thing, where you just have to listen. You put your earbuds in, you listen to the meditation, and it kind of takes you through a guided meditation to help you relax and calm down. Also on the app, as you can see with the screen grab here, if you want to use a timer and you want to do your own practice, they feature a meditation timer that you can use as well. And this site and the app also are free to use. The next one is Moodscope. This is a website out of England, and it's primarily a website. They have an app that you have to pay for, but the website is free to use with registration, and it works perfectly well. You can register on the link that you can see here, and it should be on the handout as well. And then what you do with this website is it will prompt you every day. It'll send you an email to remind you to go on the website once a day and answer the same 20 questions. Questions such as, I feel guilty, and you kind of rate how guilty you feel today, or I feel energetic, and you rate how energetic you feel. You answer those 20 questions, and it only takes a couple of minutes to do. It's a very simple kind of interface. And then it gives you a score and it allows you to track your mood. And if you pay for it, it lets you track your mood for an extended period of time. But the free version will let you track your mood for a full 7 days. So this is what I was mentioning earlier about keeping a journal. This is a website that kind of allows you to keep a little mood journal of how am I doing today? And you may be surprised at what happens. So check this out if you're interested. It's a really useful website. This next one is an app that I like quite a bit. This is an app that I personally use every day, even though I've been trained in yoga and meditation, and I've been a meditator for over 20 years. But still, I find that I need help, especially in this time right now, in getting back on track and staying with a regular practice. So this is 10% Happier. This is from the people at ABC News. And I've got a screen grab here that shows you that they've got courses that you can take, such as meditation in everyday life, dealing better with stress, dealing with troubling emotions, etc. They've also got one-shot meditations on there. They've got meditations to help you fall asleep. They've got inspirational talks that kind of get more into the nuts and bolts of meditation. This app is available for both Apple and Android phones. And a couple of the meditations are free to use without a subscription, but they do require a subscription for the full use of the app. But the good thing is that if you were a teacher or in a couple of other service industries, medical professions, and so forth, then they're allowing you to have completely free, unrestricted access to the app for a period of 6 months. You just have to go to the website and register, and then they have some instructions about how to do that. They also have a very nice coronavirus survival guide, the coronavirus sanity guide here, and I've included that link in the slide, and I think it's also in your handout as well. So this is one that I can't recommend too highly. The reason that I particularly like this app is because, again, a lot of their meditations are very brief, 5 minutes, 10 minutes at a time. So it doesn't mean you have to devote a huge chunk of your time to running through one of these guided meditations. Last app that I'm going to show you is Buddhify. This is, again, you see a screen grab here. This is from a group out of Colorado and in Great Britain as well. They also feature an app for both Apple and Android phones. It's free to download, but for full use, it does require you to pay a one-time fee, and that fee is a little different. So for Apple users, it's $4.99 one-time fee. For Android users, it's $2.99. The reason, though, that I mentioned this app and that I like this one quite a bit is that it starts, you can see this is the initial, when you log into the app or you start up the app, this is the screen that you go to, that you can see here. And it starts with this basic question of what are you doing right now? And then you click on one of these tiles, and then it takes you to a couple of you can choose from a couple of guided meditations that are designed around what you're going through right now. So you can see things like feeling stressed, exercising, can't sleep, etc. So you might want to check out this app. It's very useful, and you can get some benefit from this as well. And with that, I think I've exhausted the hour, so we can entertain any questions that we have.
I actually have a question.
Okay.
So can you tell us why it seems like teenagers always want to go to bed late and sleep later the next morning, no matter what time they get up? And is this something that is because of their hormonal changes, or is that just depending on each person?
It is a little bit of hormone changes. It's also a function of the fact that our brains really don't stop developing until we're about 25. So
wow.
in the developing brain, one of the things that our bodies are still working out when we're teens is these biological rhythms. And so it's common for teenagers to have kind of an advanced biological clock where they kind of naturally are on a non-24-hour cycle. And they really need what are called Zeitgebers, that is external cues to kind of entrain their biological clock into a 24-hour cycle. So if they're just left to their own devices, like you say, they're going to kind of sleep later and later at night and later in the day. So you may start off in May when school's out with your teenager sleeping till midnight and getting up at 9 or 10 o'clock. And then you notice as the summer goes on, bedtime gets later and waking up gets later, and maybe they're getting up at dinner time now and going to bed, right after breakfast or something like that. So again, they're on a non-24-hour cycle.
Wow. So I'm not the only one then.
No. And also another trick, and this is useful also if you're going to like travel, if we can eventually travel again at some point in our lives, if you move between time zones, that our bodies naturally can adjust about an hour at a time. So just daylight savings time, for instance, is going away at the end of next month. And think about, you have to shift that hour of your day. You have to adjust an hour either forward or back when daylight savings time goes on and off. And think about the monkey wrench that throws in you the next day. Well, really, our bodies are designed so that most of us can only adapt 1 hour at a time. So if you've got a teenager, for instance, and they've spent all summer kind of free running, which is what we call it when you're not entrained to a 24-hour clock and you just are allowed to go whenever you sleep, whenever you want, you wake up whenever you want. And then you want to adjust them back for the start of school. If they're several hours shifted from their normal bedtime, then you probably need to start several days away from the start of school and start shifting their bedtime an hour at a time, because it can be really difficult to shift them 5 hours from the bedtime that they're used to running at on the summertime to a normal bedtime when they're in school.
Gotcha. Wow. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Dr. Justice, I have a question.
Okay.
Why do you think, I work in education, and I think it's hard for people because I guess it's society, and I guess I'm just looking for guidance there. Why do you think it's so hard for us to talk about stress and mental health issues? It definitely still has a stigma around it. But I guess I'm looking for that reassurance that stigma changes when we put it out there in the open, because I don't really see anything wrong with it.
Well, that's true. There is still a significant stigma, especially in some quarters, with talking about mental illness or admitting that you have a mental illness. And there particularly seems to be something about stress-related disorders where there's kind of an extra stigma. So you may experience now that if you are suffering, for instance, with depression, and you happen to, tell a friend or a colleague, hey, I went and saw someone and got on some medication for depression, that when I started practice 30 years ago, that was taboo. People didn't do that, or they kind of got shunned if they admitted that. But nowadays, if you admit that, often the response that you'll get is, oh yeah, I'm on something too. And let me tell you about, and my friend went and saw someone and did some counseling and so forth. But there still seems to be a stigma, particularly about stress-related disorders, that we should be tough enough to handle the stress, that if we're struggling with significant symptoms of stress, that somehow makes us weak, makes us a less capable person, and that's just not the case. As I mentioned earlier in the slide presentation, different people will respond to stress differently, and some of the factors, for instance, your age when you're first exposed to stress, you don't have any control over at all. And then the circumstances of the stress that you're exposed to. So, for instance, the coronavirus, we've had no control over any of this. And so that can make a difference in our response to stress, and none of that is a factor of us or a reflection on us.
Thank you. Guys, feel free to unmute or ask a question.
I'm just looking through the chat right now.
Well,
Any
Dr. Justice,
questions?
I have one more thing I want to
Okay.
talk about. Or just ask you. I think we're seeing in education a shift of our kids, and I think that's really where my focus and the concern really is nowadays is for them. They grow up. If we really wanted to be very honest with ourselves as adults, I knew I didn't grow up with a cell phone. And I know that now our students have cell phones, they have technology, they're getting news in their hands all the time. And I think we don't spend enough time really away from those digital devices and just away with our families. One thing that I just recently turned 50, and one of the things that my papa and nana wanted me to do, and it's been like this now for about 10 years because we're always on our phones. There is one trip every year, and that's usually the Labor Day weekend before everybody has to get back to business, that the phones cannot be with us the whole weekend. There are no phones. There are no computers. So we really have to disconnect, and you can't be reached. Once we get to the location, they go in a box, and it's called the phone box, and he locks them up. But what it has done for our family by realizing, the younger kids are always hemming and hawing and complaining about it, but it forces everyone to be together, communicate, and talk. And you look back at it and you're like, okay, it wasn't so bad. And there were great memories made. And I think sometimes we have to disconnect from the craziness that goes on all around us and focus on each other and self-care and reflection. And I wish more families and did that, because there are those moments there that you get to the core of what your kids are thinking. And it's been very eye-opening for me to go through, have those trips, and just to be able to hear what's on everybody's heart and what's going on in their lives, because we just don't spend enough time. We don't spend enough time reflecting on how great our lives really are compared to other things or situations we could be in. And I think that I think that causes us to really focus away from the stress. So
Yeah, I really agree. One of my friends was telling me that when the lockdown kind of first happened here in Sumter, and everything pretty much was closed. Restaurants were closed. We didn't know if it was safe to really go out to the grocery store and things like that. The kids were home. He said that they just started a practice where at the dinner table they made dinner as a family, and then, like you say, all their devices went away, and they sat around the dinner table and they had a family dinner and had conversations. How was your day? What did you learn today? Things like that. And I really think that it's important to get back to practices like that if you can. A couple of other things there. I see that there's some questions in the chat room that I'll get to. The other thing is that it's important for us. You mentioned that our kids are kind of exposed to news and information on their devices all the time, and it's up to us really as parents and adults to help empower our kids by interpreting things for them, so that help them to be kind of critical consumers of what they see, so that they don't just become one of these people that just accepts everything on Facebook is true because it's on Facebook, or everything that I can Google on Google is true. I can't tell you the number of times I've had to tell my patients, that you can be treated by Dr. Google, you can be treated by me, but these two doctors don't agree. So a lot of times it's important to help our patients with and our children with that, with being better consumers of news and digital media.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I love the Google reference. Thank you.
Yeah. A couple of questions that are in the chat room that I see. The first is on melatonin. Melatonin is, a lot of people I know are taking melatonin over the counter right now for sleep. Melatonin can also help with our stress management and can also help with weight loss as well. But it's important to remember that melatonin, like vitamin D, is a hormone that our bodies produce naturally. And so you want to be careful when you're taking something like that over the counter. Make sure that you discuss this with your doctor or your medical professional. But it's also important to remember that the natural amount of melatonin that is in our bodies, that our bodies produce naturally, is somewhere around about 1/4 milligram. And the lowest amount that you can buy over the counter in a tablet form is 1 milligram. And I and my colleagues will commonly see people, even young children, that they'll come in and their parents are saying that, well, my child couldn't sleep and I heard that melatonin was good. And so I'm giving my child 10 milligrams of melatonin and that doesn't work. So I'm giving them 2. And it turns out that there's problems with that. The hormones that our bodies use work by means of attaching to receptors in the body and the brain. And if there's too much of a hormone circulating around, then our bodies naturally adjust by what we call down-regulating or pruning off the number of receptors that are there. And so if you're artificially taking too much of any kind of hormone, like melatonin, for instance, over a long period of time, then it actually makes your body less sensitive to the melatonin that's circulating around already. And also, high doses of melatonin can actually make sleep worse. They can cause horrific, vivid, technicolor kind of dreams. So I certainly don't mind people taking melatonin, and I do recommend it to a lot of my patients, but you want to make sure that it's 1 milligram only. Anything more than that is really too much for any person or really any child to take. The next question that I see is from Gloria B. about how much screen time should children have every day. That's a difficult decision to make. A general recommendation that I make that none of my families really are able to meet, but it's a good goal to shoot for, is 1 hour of recreational screen time a day. So on your devices and so forth, if you're using your Chromebook for school or whatever, as long as it's for school, then that's kind of unlimited. But 1 hour of non-recreational screen time per day, recreational rather, 1 hour of recreational non-work screen time per day. And it turns out that, also exposure to screens like I'm getting right now, this screen is emitting blue light, which is sending, again, that signal to my brain that it's daytime, not nighttime. So if I'm doing this for an extended period of time late at night, if I'm staring at this screen for 10, 11 o'clock at night, and I don't have any mechanism for blocking the blue light that's coming into my eyes, then that's resetting my biological clock that this is daytime, not nighttime. And it's also messing with all my hormone cycles that go on during the day. So it's important to remember that as well, that, a lot of these devices can have blue light settings where they can kind of make your screen more warm, is what they call it, shifting it to the red spectrum instead of the blue spectrum at night. But even with that, you want to be careful with too much light exposure, especially after 11 p.m. Okay. So Tamika Cannon's question is, can you provide some helpful phrases to share with others, including children, during this time when so many things are unknown and planning is difficult? What are some good coping skills to help with anxiety that can result from not being able to plan and to know what to expect during these times? Sure. Well, I think first of all, as I mentioned before, it's okay to not feel okay. And so it's okay to give that message to your kids that, things just aren't like they were, but as much as possible that mom and dad, we're going to try and the family is going to try and make things we're going to do a new normal. We're going to do some new habits, some new routines that we do. We're going to do some new kind of activities. We can't do the things that we would normally do. But often, our children especially are looking to us to make sense of the world. They want us to tell them that it's okay. And as much as possible, we need to tell them how to be safe, but to try to communicate to them that, things are uncertain right now, and it's okay to be upset with that. And maybe even to share that, mom or dad, that we are stressed with these things, but that it's going to be okay. That even though, we may be upset that we can't do things, we can't go on a family vacation, we can't do the things that we normally do, that we're going to be okay. So just keep coming back to that. It's okay to not feel okay, but we as a family are going to be okay. So I hope that helps. So Blaine just put a reminder on there about bright LED lights. Yeah, exactly right. So again, if you're going to have lights on in your home, and you have to have the light on after 11 p.m., between those window of 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., then try to make sure that it is very dim light and that it is below the level of your knees. So, most of us in our houses have outlets that are pretty low and close to the floorboards. And it's okay to plug in a night light there or something like that, but make sure it's a dim light. And if you can, don't keep it on all the time. Don't keep it on all night long if you can possibly avoid it. Any other questions? Maybe not about stress, but anything else you've wanted to ask a psychiatrist before?
I have a quick question.
Okay.
Can you tell us the difference between stress and anxiety? Maybe just a brief summary of that.
Sure. So stress is, as I mentioned, is first of all a part of our daily lives, and it is a reaction to generally like a threatening or traumatic situation. It's designed to be kind of a brief reaction that we go through when we're faced with a trauma or a stress, and then it's supposed to go away. Anxiety, however, is a psychological condition that is usually divorced from, so it's separate from any external stressor. That's one of the things that can make it so troubling for people. And there are various kinds of anxiety. There is what we call generalized anxiety, which is where the person just feels kind of nervous, anxious, on edge all the time. So whether they're going about their normal day or at their home, or whether they're in public or whatever, they just feel anxious and on edge and nervous all the time. Then there's another condition called panic disorder. That's more where people have discrete periods where they just have overwhelming symptoms of anxiety. So these are things like you feel like your heart is beating so fast that you feel like you're having a heart attack or a stroke. A lot of times when people first have one of these episodes, they will go to the emergency room and say, I've got to be having a heart attack. I'm having chest pain. I'm short of breath. I can't breathe. My throat's closing up. There's got to be something wrong with me. So shortness of breath, rapid heart rate. They may break out in a cold sweat. They may have numbness and tingling, like in their lips, their hands and feet. They may also just have this subjective feeling like they're going to die or something horrible is just about to happen. Now, panic episodes are generally very brief, so 10, 15 minutes at the most. But what makes them so awful is that they just seem to come out of nowhere. They come out of the blue. And so what happens is that a person will be shopping at Walmart, and then they'll have one of these episodes. And so they'll associate going to Walmart with having an episode. We, like I said, our bodies and our brains like to know certainty, and we like to kind of figure out things. So if I had one of these attacks when I was at Walmart, then the fix is I'm not going to go to Walmart anymore. But then you have an attack when you're taking your kid to school. And so, well, okay, I can fix that. I'm just not going to take my kid to school anymore. I'm going to get somebody else to take my child to school. And so as you have one of these panic attacks and you have another one and another one in various situations, your life kind of shrinks to where you're just afraid to leave your home because you're trying to avoid one of these attacks coming on. And that's a symptom that we call agoraphobia, which is literally fear of the marketplace, but it means fear of situations where you're afraid of having an anxiety attack. So those are kind of the three main forms of anxiety that we see in patients that we treat.
Oh, wow. Thank you. And do you think that talk therapy is pretty effective as far as adolescents and, school-age children?
Yes, for all kinds of anxiety and stress, even for mild forms of depression, talk therapy or psychotherapy is a very effective treatment strategy. It tends to work in general for about 2/3 of the people that try it. So it's about 60 to 70% effective for any individual person. Now, there are some people that just don't respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the problem with talk therapy is that you have to actually go and do some things, right? You have to go to the therapist, and the therapist generally is going to give you some homework that you have to go home and work on. Also, sometimes it can be really uncomfortable to go and talk about your problems with someone for several sessions. So sometimes people will avoid doing talk therapy and just want medication, thinking, well, that's got to be the answer.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times we will have patients who will come to me and my colleagues and they want a pill to fix something that a pill is just not going to fix. So often we will try to beg them and try and convince them that you need to go to talk therapy. So it's not the case that every psychiatric condition can be fixed by a pill and you can avoid going to talk therapy. That's not the case at all. And sometimes people can do great with talk therapy by itself and they never need any kind of medication.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I have a question. Do you have
Okay.
any suggestions for finding a therapist that pairs well with you? Like I've had this discussion with, different friends, and I think it can sometimes be difficult to find a therapist who, like personality-wise, meshes, with you as a as a patient,
Mhm.
finding that right fit.
That's really important, and that's a great question. It's just not the case that every therapist that a therapist is great for every single patient. That there's one therapist who just can treat every single patient. You're right. You've got to have the right fit. So you've got to feel comfortable. One of the things that it's really critical for the therapist to do is to create a sense of what we call the therapeutic environment, which is a sense that I can go into my therapist's office and I'm going to be okay, even if I feel like I'm falling apart, even if I'm crying my eyes out, even if I'm talking about the worst day of my life, that I know that the therapist has got my back, that therapist will get me through this and I'm going to be okay, even if I don't feel okay in the moment. And it takes a special fit to find the right therapist for you. Another thing to keep in mind is that some therapists are trained in a certain style of therapy. And there are different styles. So some therapists may be more what we call cognitive behaviorally oriented, where they're into looking at specific symptoms and working on, okay, let's figure out some skills to give you and work on those skills about how to fit you better into the outside world and be as happy as possible. There are other therapists who are more what we call psychodynamically oriented, where they want to focus on, let's look at your past and the issues in your past that may have led up to the symptoms that brought you to this point. And so one person may go in wanting, I just want some simple skills and I want somebody to give me some direction about how to go about dealing with this. well, they're not going to do well in a psychodynamically oriented therapy. Someone else who really thinks, I've been struggling with this for my whole life, and I really think this goes back to things that I had happen to me as a child, they're probably not going to do as well with a cognitive behavioral therapist because they really need to deal with long-standing issues that have been going on for a long period of time. So, maybe asking the therapist or maybe checking the therapist out and saying, first of all, what style of therapy do you do? And this is where Google can actually help you a little bit, in that you can Google the various types of therapy and get some good information from especially the American Psychiatric and the American Psychological Association about various types of therapy and what you think might fit best for you. But then really you're going to have to just try. You're going to have to go to a therapist, take the leap of going to a therapist and trying them and kind of seeing whether you fit or not. So I hope that helps. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah. So any other questions? Okay, well, we want to thank everybody for being here, but before we let you all head out, we're going to do we want to do a drawing. And I know you guys, if you're really following social emotional learning, one of the gifts that we would like to bestow on, we're going to do a random drawing with a random name picker, and is The Permission to Feel. And the book is by Dr. Mark Brackett. So this is a book study that is actually free, and the gentleman that does this book, we can share the link with you also for everyone that's on here. It is a free book study, and he's going through the chapters, and it really is talking about social and emotional, the aspects, every aspect about it's okay to have emotions, it's okay to feel things. So what we're going to do is I'm going to quickly go through the picker, and I'm going to let you know. And if I call your name, if you will just email me, Jessica, will you type in my email, and we will get those books shipped out to you along with the link. So if you're interested in just reading the book on your own, great. But if you want to join, I know a lot of the South Carolina PTA board, there is a major group in the Charleston area of educators that are doing his book study. So you read at home and you kind of come together, you listen to him talk, you can ask questions. So just give me 1 second, and I'm going to go through just going to randomly do this so you can know who won. Give me 1 second. And Jessica, if you'll type these for me once it stops. First name, Blaine. So congratulations, Blaine. You are one of the winners of the book. And the other is Barbara Bryant. And you know what the heck? Let's go for 3 books. Okay, let me do another. So Blaine, Barbara Bryant, and Wendy Ward. So if you will make sure you email me at the email that Jessica posts, we will get those books out to you this week, and we will also send you an email. I'm just going to say thank you for being here. Dr. Justice, thank you for your time, your effort. This is a great kickoff for us as we move in the right direction to support our parents, our families, our teachers, even all the people in this phone call. It's time to start having hard conversations and start asking questions. Just because it's always been that way doesn't mean that that's the way it's supposed to be. So I want to say thank you. And Jessica, do you want to close us out, hon?
Yes. Again, I did want to say thank you to everybody for joining us. This presentation is recorded, so it will be available for you to view at a later date in case you wanted to go back and kind of look over something. And we're really excited to get this kickoff going. Like Devan said, we really do need to, start talking more about mental health, social emotional learning, because, you know, it's come quite as a taboo topic, unfortunately, these days. So I think the more we can get it out, the better that we can help people. And Dr. Justice, thank you so, so much for doing this with us. This was extremely helpful. I certainly learned a lot. It looks like everybody else really enjoyed your presentation, so I cannot thank you enough.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate all the kind attention and the great questions too. And I hope that this has been helpful. When I sign off, I'm going to email my the slide deck that I just presented to Jessica and Devan. And if you guys want to just send it out however you want to the participants, that'd be great.
Thank you, Dr. Justice.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye, everyone.
Everyone have a great night. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you too. Bye.